For the royals, tradition is everything.
Tradition is the raison d'etre of the royal family, the human embodiment of Britishness.
Spectacular.
The thundering of the hooves and the banging of the drums. I defy anyone not to get thrilled by that.
Sacred.
It's almost as though the king is invested with superpowers.
And very British.
Victoria's funeral was a reminder that we were still the dog's whatnots at this game.
Now we reveal the secrets of those traditions. From banquets, to christenings, to coronations.
You may think it's pantomime, but no, the uniforms were handed down from servant to servant.
And how some traditions can go wrong.
With Elizabeth I, her body actually exploded in its coffin.
It's a rich royal heritage that's been forged through duty to the nation.
The British monarchy is always at the service of the British state.
No matter what the task.
The duty of the royals is to go and open every damn thing that's around, from a supermarket to sewage works.
The Queen loved it. Prince Philip hated it.
As for over 1,000 years, the royals have shaped the history and the traditions we know today.
They're sending out a message. This is an ancient institution, and it's here to stay.
These are the secrets of royal traditions, then and now. This time, the royal wedding traditions born out of love and loss.
It speaks to the power of the royal wedding. It's not just a moment in time, it's a moment through time.
The sporting pastimes that have their roots in 500 years of monarchy.
They're a horsey old lot, our royal family, actually, aren't they?
There's a sort of Jilly Cooper element. It's all quite sexy.
And the royal custom that launched 1,000 high society debutantes.
In many ways, the debutante season was the equivalent of the Oscars.
If there's one royal event that's guaranteed to get the nation's hearts racing, it's a right royal wedding. Up to 24 million people in the UK tuned in back in 2011, and a further 1 million lined the streets to see Kate and William say "I do" in a ceremony packed with tradition.
I think William and Catherine's wedding was very traditional. She did everything, I think, in the way that royal brides have from the past.
William and Catherine were very much presented as a couple in love. There was very obvious affection between them. You kept the couple at the centre of the wedding, but you surrounded it with the trappings of monarchy.
For many of us, nothing says tradition more than a royal bride's white wedding dress. But surprisingly, it's a tradition that isn't that old. The custom was first started less than 200 years ago, back in 1840, by Queen Victoria, when she wore a dress that sent a clear message to the man she loved.
The reason why she wears white is she is well aware her constitutional role puts her above and beyond her consort. But Victoria, in her marriage, is always submissive to Albert. And she's wearing white to underscore her purity, her chastity, her vulnerability, her femininity.
Victoria's white wedding gown also kick-started another royal tradition, that of the bride using their dress to champion British design. From Queen Elizabeth II wearing Norman Hartnell, to Lady Di with her show-stopping Emmanuel number, right up to Kate's beautiful gown designed by Sarah Burton for Alexander McQueen.
Therein speaks to the power of the royal family and the power of the royal wedding. It's not just a moment in time, it's a moment through time.
Of course, no royal wedding would be complete without the public pomp and circumstance and full adulation of the crowds. But this tradition, too, is a relatively new phenomenon.
Royal weddings in the past would have been unrecognisable to us. They were usually in private chapels, they were within palaces, not in cathedrals, and any celebrations were for the family and the court.
Wedding guests wait to honour the royal couple outside Westminster Abbey.
But by the 20th century, the monarchy realised that the public celebration of a royal wedding was the perfect way to promote their brand.
To get the mass spectacle what we think of as the modern royal wedding, you have to go to after the First World War.
The British monarchy is keen to show that they will survive by maintaining tradition while innovating at the same time. So there is going to be much more public participation in the royal weddings. So they start moving them to very visible, very accessible public cathedrals.
And with more public participation came more new royal traditions, many of which spring from the marriage of the future King George VI to the future Queen Mother on a rainy day in 1923.
About 1 million people line the streets of London to watch Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon leave her parents' townhouse in Mayfair and be escorted to the Abbey.
One particular royal tradition that started that day had a very personal connection to the bride, as she was the first to lay her bridal bouquet at the tomb of the unknown warrior at Westminster Abbey.
It's become tradition, and that goes back to the Queen Mother, whose brother died in the First World War at the Battle of Loos.
So the First World War and its memory, and the memory of the men who had died in the trenches, was one of immense personal significance to Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon. And when she saw the unknown warrior's tomb, she felt moved enough to run over and set down the bouquet.
So this rather lovely custom of laying a bridal bouquet on the tomb of the unknown warrior starts in 1923 and continues to this day.
Once all the pomp and circumstance of a very public wedding is over, royal newlyweds, just like their commoner counterparts, need a honeymoon. And our younger royals have started a new tradition, quietly disappearing to exclusive resorts to help them recover from the excesses of the big day.
We know that William and Catherine went off to the Seychelles. I mean, what do you want on your honeymoon? You want sun, sand, sea, and sex, and I guess that's what they had.
But in the second half of the 20th century, it was a rite of passage for royal newlyweds to honeymoon on board the royal yacht. And that most traditional mode of royal transport harks back hundreds of years.
The British Isles are an ancient archipelago, so historically Britain has always been a maritime empire.
Even though Tudor monarchs were much less well-travelled than the modern royal family, they still had their own personal ships. Henry VIII did sail across to France a few times on campaign, and he always did so in great style. We know of flagships such as the Mary Rose, for example. And they were great symbols of royal power and might.
The most recent royal yacht came into service in the early 1950s. A time when a ship was the only way to get the monarch to the furthest reaches of the Commonwealth.
The announcement that there was going to be a new royal yacht came just a few years actually into the marriage of Elizabeth and Philip. It was 1951, and probably to their great joy, they were told that a new royal yacht was going to be commissioned to replace the Victoria and Albert III, which was about 50 years old by that time.
From the very start, the Queen and Prince Philip took a very keen interest. Prince Philip was particularly interested in the more nautical side of things, but the Queen took a very keen interest in all the designs, particularly the interiors.
By April 1953, the Queen's personally designed ship was ready to go.
The launch of Britannia was big news. This yacht was going to be emblematic of this new age, this new reign. It didn't have a name to start with, it was just given a code number.
There's not a lot you can probably keep secret about the design of a new ship up at Clydebank. It was fairly public knowledge, I suppose, what the ship was going to look like. But one thing they could keep secret was, what was she going to be called?
I named the ship Britannia.
When the Queen got on board Britannia, she was home, and she was private, and she was relaxed.
There was something very happy-making for her and for Philip about Britannia. I think he loved the idea that he was kind of an admiral, and she loved the idea that she was the sort of admiral's wife, often visiting her realms, being the head of the Commonwealth, and able to entertain people in her drawing room, even though she was thousands of miles from London.
In this atmosphere of rare privacy, Britannia developed a racy reputation as the royal love boat.
The first royal honeymoon in the yacht was Princess Margaret in 1960, when she married the Earl of Snowdon.
The royal yacht, at the moment a very magnificent honeymoon cruise yacht, brought Princess Margaret and her husband on a brief visit to Trinidad.
The only time that double beds would be brought on was if there was a honeymoon.
Princess Margaret and Lord Snowdon set a precedent that would carry on for decades.
Princess Anne and Captain Mark Phillips, Charles and Diana, Andrew and Sarah Ferguson, they all honeymooned on the yacht. It was said that Diana loved swimming in the sea off the royal yacht, and that when she did that, she would go off one end of the yacht and all the crew, to protect her modesty, would very respectfully be down the other end of the yacht.
But many of the marriages forged on Britannia would ultimately have another thing in common.
It did become very obvious that all of these marriages ended in divorce. And so there was a saying going around that maybe, you know, she is the cursed ship for honeymoons.
Coming up, the cursed ship brings centuries of maritime tradition to an end, and the late Queen to tears.
It was very shocking for the British public to see the Queen being emotional. It's something we'd never seen before.
The sporting customs that turn our royals into adrenaline junkies.
I think one of the reasons the men of the family have really loved polo is because it is dangerous.
And how royal tradition faced its greatest challenge with the tragic death of a much-loved princess.
The most beautiful woman in the world was there in Paris, dead. And someone had to take control of it.
While some royal traditions have trickled down to become commonplace in daily life for us commoners, one sporting royal rite of passage will always remain a preserve of the truly elite, the aptly named Sport of Kings.
I think polo combines many of the things that royals, especially male royals, like.
You scored the most goals too?
Well, no, didn't they?
You scored two, three.
Did they allow that one at the end?
They like horses, they're quite competitive, they like dressing up.
Most people don't know much about polo, and I'm not pretending I do either, except I have been to a few matches. And it is exciting, it's very fast-moving, and it's fun. It's also stupendously expensive.
The origins of polo can be traced back over 2,500 years to ancient Persia. But our royal connection started in the 1920s with King George VI. And it was his son-in-law, the future Prince Philip, who really took to the sport.
It really comes into the modern line of the royal family through Lord Louis Mountbatten, who was Prince Philip's uncle. So Prince Philip, when stationed in Malta after the Second World War, he plays polo there with Louis Mountbatten and others. And that's how it sort of mainlined into the royal family.
He goes on not only to perform very well and for a couple of decades, but also it's one of the few things that unite him with his son, because Charles is, I think, one of the top 10 polo players going forward.
Polo may be a hobby for the super wealthy, but there's also another reason our royals are drawn to it.
I think one of the reasons that, from the Duke of Edinburgh onwards, certainly, the men of the family have really loved polo is because it is dangerous.
I suppose it's the adrenaline rush. From a point of view of being royal and having a quite carefully planned life, every now and then they want to break loose and get that adrenaline rush.
It's about horse riding, it's about competition, it's an elite sport. I think there's a sort of Jilly Cooper element. The ladies watching this sort of very butcher, masculine sport. It's all quite sexy.
The sport has become so significant to royal life that many key moments, especially romantic ones, have traditionally played out against the backdrop of the polo field.
It always seems to be girls in their glad rags watching their men from the sidelines, including Meghan and Kate. And famously, of course, Diana.
It all started with the future Princess Diana stealing the polo show back in 1981, wearing that now infamous black sheep jumper. 4 years and 2 children later, rumours surrounding the state of the royal marriage were quashed on another polo field.
I think it was 1985 when she gives Charles a fulsome kiss in the wake of his polo performance, and then we knew the marriage was okay.
But finally, 7 years after that, on yet another polo field, it was clear their marriage was in major trouble.
Then in 1992, when the kiss misses, I think Charles tries to kiss Diana, and we know the marriage is over because even, you know, in the sort of incredibly romantic setting of a polo match, she can't really bring herself to display any public affection for her husband.
It's a long-held tradition that royals don't show emotion in public. And the late Queen managed to keep a suitably stiff upper lip throughout her eldest son's very acrimonious marital breakdown. But what finally shook her very regal resolve was something far more personal. The end of a long-standing royal maritime tradition.
It was very shocking for the British public to see the Queen being emotional. It's something we'd never seen before.
The tears almost flowed. Her lips almost trembled. You could see she was trying to fight back her huge sadness. And the Duke beside her just looked very serious, very grave, very upset.
And the cause of the late Queen's sadness? Bidding farewell to the royal yacht Britannia, a traditional mode of royal transport dating back to Henry VIII.
I remember very clearly the day of the decommissioning of Britannia. It was freezing cold. We were down at Portsmouth, and for 13 hours I stood on that dockside and froze. But my problems were nothing compared to the Queen's.
There you had all the royal family on the quayside, all the ship's crew lined up. The one person who wasn't there was the Queen Mother, who just decided it's too painful, so she just stayed away.
This had been more than just a yacht. Britannia was the only home the Queen ever chose for herself.
Many monarchs leave behind a legacy in bricks and mortar in the form of a palace or royal residence that they have designed and built. That's not the case with Queen Elizabeth. The nearest she got was the royal yacht.
It had a real sense of presence. It was very, very sleek. The deck was like a piece of furniture. It had over 200 sailors on it, a marine band, the royal household, 30 people. But it was all sort of very decorous, the whole thing. It was this most fantastic floating palace, but also an embassy for Britain.
Britannia was a home away from home for the Queen, a place where she could properly relax, away from the prying eyes of the public and press.
The sailors wear soft-soled shoes so they don't make any noise as they walk up and down decks. The sailors communicate with hand signals rather than shouting at each other so as not to disturb the royals.
The crew on board Britannia were very trusted by the royals, and rightly so. It was said that it was the only palace that didn't leak.
But by 1994, Britannia had travelled over 1 million miles. Enough to circle the globe for every year she had been afloat.
After 40 years at sea, Britannia was beginning to get quite tired. She needed, on top of the £10 million that it cost in general upkeep, an extra £17 million to make her seaworthy.
Things were pretty tricky in the country in the early 90s. I mean, things were very difficult for the royal family, but they were very difficult for everyone else because we were in the recession. Money was extremely short. It was a very delicate situation for the Queen. She was well aware that the public image of a royal yacht was not going down too well. She let it be known that she was willing to give up the royal yacht. Willing is quite different to accepting it willingly. It was a huge sacrifice for her because she loved that yacht and she didn't really want to part with it, but I think she felt that in view of the public scrutiny that was going on of everything to do with the royal family, she had to make that gesture.
But documents from the National Archives suggest this wasn't the whole story.
Publicly, the palace was making noises that it was okay for the royal yacht to be relinquished. Behind the scenes, though, There was a lot of lobbying going on, saying that, the Queen would very much appreciate a new royal yacht, but they didn't want this to come out because they knew it would be a PR disaster.
Unfortunately for the Queen, one politician was listening and decided to get involved.
Things were made worse when the Defence Secretary then, Michael Portillo, decided to put his 2 pennyworth in, saying that there should be a new royal yacht, and that's what a future Conservative government would do. This was obviously very contentious because it should not be a party political issue, and it forced the Labour Party to take the opposite view. And that made things even more difficult for the royal family.
The Queen will have realised that as soon as the debate around the royal yacht and its future became a political hot potato, it was time to drop the whole thing.
The royal family were pretty annoyed about Michael Portillo getting involved and making this a political issue. That's the last thing they wanted. And Prince Philip made that very clear, actually, to his biographer some years later. He said that Portillo's intervention had made a complete of the whole thing.
Portillo later suggested his attempts were at least appreciated by Her Majesty. But what's undeniable is the intervention failed, and hundreds of years of the tradition of the royal yacht finally came to an end on December the 11th, 1997.
People were confused as to why the end of a yacht's life would mean that the Queen, who had been in many, many more distressing situations before, would choose that to show emotion. But that actually doesn't tell the full picture. This yacht represented the Queen's own reign, her father's death, her legacy as a monarch. It represented really a lot of what she thought of herself as a monarch.
It's a bitterly cold day and a band's playing Auld Lang Syne. The camera's focused on the Queen, having tears in her eyes. But I was there that day. Just to the right was a grandstand full of 2,000 ex-royal yachtsmen and their families, and most of them were in tears as well.
After the ceremony, Queen Elizabeth II stepped on board Britannia for the last time.
She took a final tour around her haven, her home, that she'd loved for more than 40 years. The clocks on board Britannia are all stopped at 3:01, which is the time she stepped off her beloved home for the last time.
Coming up, the traditional royal duties that continue, even in the wake of a tragedy.
I thought straight away that I should keep her safe and look after her in death the way I did in life.
The British monarchy's long-running connection to one animal.
They're a horsey old lot, our royal family, actually, aren't they?
And the royal wedding day that defied tradition.
She throws up all over her mother-in-law's very expensive skirt. Not the best start when your mother-in-law's the Queen.
Any big royal ceremony, from weddings to coronations, involves years, if not decades, of planning and tradition. But when fate struck in the cruelest way and Diana, Princess of Wales, died unexpectedly.
Across the country, the shock of the past 24 hours is undiminished.
Carefully planned tradition was the last thing on anyone's mind. But in the hours after the tragic news of Diana's death broke, 2 loyal servants knew they needed to protect her.
I thought straight away that I should get to Paris as soon as possible to keep her safe and look after her in death the way I did in life. The most beautiful woman in the world was there in Paris, dead, and someone had to take control of it. And that's what I did. I did it with the assistance of Colin, the princess's driver.
On arrival at the Paris hospital where the princess had died, the 2 royal aides realized ensuring her privacy in death was going to be a major undertaking.
I walked into the room, and there was the princess lying in a bed. The face was not covered up, but not as I thought would be a dreadful thing to look at. And there she was in the room, with people walking in and bowing and walking out. Why has people got to walk in and out? We started to take control, and we sealed the room.
But it wasn't just well-wishing members of the public the two men had to deal with.
The car crash happens, but most of us wouldn't expect those injured persons to then be followed to the hospital by this relentless paparazzi braying mob.
There were big rooms with massive windows but no curtains. And I looked up and I said, the pressure on that roof. I got some blankets, that's all I could find, and got up and covered the window with blankets, which really made it hotter. So I asked for some fans to be brought in, and they brought some very big fans. And I put them into the corner and turned them on. I turned round to look at the princess, and her hair was moving, and her eyelashes were moving. And just for that millisecond, and Paul did as well, we thought she was alive.
I'm glad that someone was there to shield her from what had been a relentless glare in her married life. She deserved that in death.
As mourners gathered outside Diana's home, Kensington Palace in London, Prince Charles was breaking the news to Prince Harry and William in Balmoral.
It must have been the worst day of Prince Charles's life, to have to wake up his boys having got this ghastly news in the middle of the night.
He was devastated that what had happened to his wife, to the mother of his children.
In Paris, Colin and Paul made sure Diana was given the dignity in death she deserved.
We contained it until the Prince of Wales arrived that afternoon, and then we could all leave Paris in the security and safety of the Queen's flight and bring the princess home.
Once Diana's body was back on British soil, royal tradition took over. Her funeral 5 days later was based on the Queen Mother's well-rehearsed funeral plan.
There was a funeral of state proportions in London and a very private interment at Althorpe.
Princess Diana was finally laid to rest on a small island in a lake on her family estate. But the tradition of treating royals with respect in death hasn't always been observed. One of the most extreme cases being that of Henry VIII's sixth and final wife.
In September 1548, Catherine Parr dies at Sudeley Castle. She had outlived the king, but only to die the year later. But being royal doesn't guarantee a restful afterlife. During the Civil War, Catherine's grand tomb was smashed up and the coffin behind it was lost. But by the 18th century, grave spotting had become rather popular, and two ladies in 1782 went hunting for Catherine's grave and finally found her. They were so thrilled, they actually unwrapped the body. They were shocked to see her perfectly preserved features begin to decay. They hastily wrapped her up, but that wasn't the end of the depredations that Catherine would suffer. A few years after that, someone else got Catherine out of her grave and danced with the body, played with it, and left it exposed on a heap of rubbish. The vicar found out and said it had to be reburied. However, when it was reburied, someone was seen snooping around the grave, so the decision was made to dig a much deeper grave to stop these grave tourists. But the farmer who was digging the grave got completely drunk and, it was said, basically spent the night going wild with the corpse and then burying the coffin upside down. It wasn't for another 50 years until Catherine was properly laid to rest. Her remains by this point was apparently a pile of powder, but they were buried in a spacious vault in Sudeley Castle and never disturbed again.
Many royal traditions and rituals date back centuries, and for many of them there's a common theme.
They're a horsey old lot, our royal family, actually, aren't they? Horse riding seems to be what they do. They learn at their mother's knee.
We had a saying at Buckingham Palace: horses, dogs, husband, kids. That was the preference of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
The royals' famous love of horses stretches right back to the 16th century.
Henry VIII, actually, was one of the earliest monarchs we know about who really was quite passionate about his horses. He spent a lot of time with them. In his early years as king, he would go out hunting literally all day, every day, rising before dawn and not returning until the sun had set.
Today, polo may seem a dangerous pastime for the monarchy, but it has nothing on Henry VIII's favourite equestrian pastime, a sport which came close to killing him and ultimately made his life a misery.
Henry had always loved to joust. Now, people lost limbs, they lost eyes, they lost their lives in jousts. And Henry himself, although he was a world-class jouster, he came to grief in 1536 when he suffered a fall from his horse that left him with an injury to his leg. And that wound never healed. It plagued Henry VIII for the rest of his life.
Henry's obsession with horses continued throughout his life. And 500 years later, our modern royals continued the tradition.
The Queen really was horse mad, and that passed on really to all of her children. All of the children recreationally ride.
Anne, the Princess Royal, really took to it, and she is an expert equestrian. And of course, she represented this country in the Olympics at Montreal in 1976. I think she quite likes the danger of it. She has got badly injured in taking part in equestrian events, but I don't think anything will ever put her off her love of horses.
I don't think that they carry on these traditions for the fun. They at least are happy to carry on because they really mean something to them.
Unsurprisingly, horses are also a key traditional element of any royal wedding.
Once upon a time, everybody travelled by horse. And the royal family are now the only people that have large numbers of carriages. And that's another of these sort of old traditions that they keep going.
Today, royal marriages like that of William and Kate are based on love. But in the past, love wasn't high on the list when it came to a traditional royal union.
Previously, the way in which you double down on a nation's political power is by creating or having alliances, and the way in which you can have an alliance is to marry. More often than not, you are being forced sometimes to marry someone you're not in love with, you don't find physically attractive, and often you can't even speak the same language as.
And that was exactly what happened with the arranged marriage of Prince Frederick in the 18th century.
It was 1736. George II decides he wants his playboy son, Frederick, Prince of Wales, to marry a proper German Protestant princess. So they decide on this poor girl, Augusta of Saxe-Coburg. She's only 16. She's not courted, she's just told she's got to go and marry him. She doesn't want to come, but she has no choice. She's packed off with her doll on this ship, and the journey is really rough. She arrives in England, she's got terrible seasickness. And also, she can't speak a word. Her parents hadn't taught her English because they were convinced that everyone in England, now they've been ruled by German kings, would all speak German. Of course, not. She's bunged into this tight wedding dress, bunged onto St. James's Chapel, and when she's marched up the aisle, it's too much. She throws up, and she throws up all over her mother-in-law's very expensive skirt. Not the best start when your mother-in-law's the Queen. But you know, actually, Augusta herself becomes a very good wife to Frederick and really becomes a great support to him. So it shows that there's a possibility that the marriage can work, even if a wedding is full of disasters, even if you're sick on the floor of a palace.
The royal tradition of sealing a marriage with a kiss on the balcony of Buckingham Palace goes back to Charles and Diana's wedding in 1981. And while the world-famous balcony has become the focal point for almost every national celebration, from weddings to jubilees, the real business of royal custom and ritual takes place just around the corner at St. James's Palace.
Buckingham Palace's balconies are world famous. Crowds gather to get a glimpse of the royal family as they emerge on major festival occasions. But this humble building of 5 arches is a much more important balcony. In fact, it's crucial to the monarchy. And it's at St. James's where, at the death of any monarch, the Accession Council meet to discuss the terms of transfer on the principle of Rex Nunquam Moritur, the king never dies. And all of the assembled dignitaries process onto this balcony to make the proclamation to the nation of the inheritance of the crown.
Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III.
Buckingham Palace may be where the monarchy lives, but St. James's is where the crown resides.
Coming up, the traditions which have, thankfully, been lost to time. From the custom of high society ladies being presented at court,
Princess Margaret goes, oh, any old tart in London could get in these days. She clearly didn't think it was selective enough.
to the shocking ritual of a new royal bride undergoing a public bedding.
The first time they encountered their palace courtiers pretty much was when they were half naked in a bed, being fondled by their husbands.
Some royal traditions, like the customs surrounding royal weddings, have been updated over the years to reflect modern tastes, while others, such as a monarch's coronation, have remained the same for centuries.
The monarchy is constantly evolving and constantly changing itself, but it prefers to do that bit by bit and to maintain the largest part of tradition that it can while moving forward.
But while many royal rites of passage lend themselves to evolution and adaptation, some have been deemed too old-fashioned to survive, none more so than the once annual tradition of the coming out of the débutantes.
The débutante was a literal translation female beginner, a deb, someone at the start of her adult life.
A débutante was a young unmarried woman from an upper-class background who, at about the age of 18, would be launched into the ballrooms and onto the marriage market of the upper class.
And then the big thrill in the life of a young society girl, the presentation, filmed for the first time in history. The season's debutantes curtsied to King Edward.
The high point of the débutante season came in early May with Queen Charlotte's Ball, the high society equivalent of speed dating today.
The girls wearing white would be brought to Buckingham Palace, they would curtsy to the sovereign and the consort, and at that point they would be in society. And it was widely covered in the newspapers at the time. It was a big social event.
To be invited to the biggest party in town and to try and bag a husband at the same time, ideally a really rich one, that's a great gig.
In many ways, the debutante season was the equivalent of the Oscars. It was when very famous, very wealthy people turned up in their finest and were often photographed or were visible in public view. So it was like a celebrity event for many people in London at the time.
The ball had its roots back in the 18th century.
In 1718, St James's Palace Ballroom, King George III held the first ever debutante ball, called Queen Charlotte's Ball after his wife. Nothing could be more glamorous, you'd think. It was terrifying. The lady-in-waiting to the Queen, Fanny Burney, also the novelist, she wrote this incredible account that said, "You must stay still the whole time. You had to stand up for hours, perfectly erect, waiting for your name to be called, very heavy gown, corset so tight you could barely breathe, carrying a heavy train, and no sign of faintness, no sign of shakiness. That would show no strength of character. If you want to cough, it is better to choke than cough. If you want to sneeze, better burst a blood vessel. And if one of your hairpins came loose and it was poking into your head, better let the blood gush from your head than take out your hairpin. Better bite off a piece of your cheek in pain than take out a hairpin. Essentially, it is better to die on the spot than it is express any physical discomfort." Husband hunting was brutal. It was tough.
Debutante presentations at court continued annually right up until 1958, when vicious criticism of the tradition came from some surprising quarters.
By the 1950s, there are two main strains of criticism of the season, best encapsulated by Princess Margaret, who feels that the standards of the debutantes have slipped.
Princess Margaret goes, oh, any old tart in London can get in these days. She clearly didn't think it was selective enough.
Her brother-in-law, Prince Philip, was more on the egalitarian side of things, and he thought the debutante season was ridiculous and that it was an embarrassing, archaic ritual that they should get rid of.
Despite the Queen Mother, herself a debutante, defending the high society tradition, it was on borrowed time.
Elizabeth II does eventually side with her husband and some of her advisors and decides to retire the presentations at Buckingham Palace. And when that goes, the debutante system, as it had existed, really fades completely into irrelevance.
Today's royal brides can thank their lucky stars. Another well-attended royal tradition has also been lost to time. The custom of the monarch very publicly consummating his marriage.
In 1486, Henry VII was marrying Elizabeth of York at Westminster. It was a lavish feast, the celebration of the end of the Wars of the Roses. But the main event wasn't the feast, it was the bedding ceremony. The royal couple was stripped by their courtiers, put to bed and given a concoction of wine and spices to get things going. And then this wonderful place would be turned into a giant theatrical spectacle where everyone had a good old look at the wedding night taking place. This is a shocking invasion of privacy, and royal brides found it terrifying. The first time they encountered their palace courtiers pretty much was when they were half naked in a bed being fondled by their husbands, and they knew that everyone was watching to see exactly what went on. What was crucial was that the royal marriage was consummated, because the most important job of a royal bride was to have a child, and so the sexual act had to be confirmed as taking place so that pregnancy could happen swiftly. For the wedding guest, watching the royal bedding ceremony was a spectator sport. It was like watching an X-rated movie for entertainment, but this time it was the king. The bedding ceremony really showed the royal bride that every part of her body and her life in the palace was public property. Nothing was private.
From beddings to weddings, debutantes to sporting distractions, the royals' rituals and customs may have changed over the centuries, but respect for tradition remains at the heart of the monarchy and the role they continue to play in British life.
Tradition is central to the royal family. It links them back to the past. It also makes the present feel more stable, and it provides a framework for the future.
Next time, how Princess Charlotte broke a centuries-old royal tradition.
Charlotte's birth changed everything. It was striking out for the modern woman. I thought that was brilliant.
The secret weapon that has saved the royals' popularity.
It really breathed new life into the monarchy. When people had been questioning what it's there for, Victoria answered in style with this magnificent diamond jubilee.
And how the tradition of exotic gifts has enthralled generations of royals.
James I was given a pet armadillo, and only he was allowed to walk the armadillo because he didn't trust anyone to look after it.